Al Jazeera has a pro-Hamas bias. That's not exactly breaking news, as is most of what we talk about here, although you would expect it to be more widely understood. But Al Jazeera, makes little pretense otherwise. Although in the West, they do seem to be considered some sort of a source of information that you don't get elsewhere, which in some cases it's true, and there's a reason for that. One of the reasons, and I saw an article. So we're talking. Let me back up. We're talking about the what the IDF revealed yesterday, which is six Hamas and Islamic Jihad operatives, or six Al Jazeera journalists are revealed to be involved in Hamas and Islamic Jihad. There's more to it than that, but that is one of the revelations. And I was watching earlier today an article on Al Jazeera, a video where they were saying, um, they were talking about the accusations. They're basically saying, look, in the past, Israel has shown documents that have been proven to be false. This was their argument. Like Al Jazeera isn't even trying to do something that they probably couldn't do, which is to claim that this is not the case. Today, the IDF revealed even further collaboration, official collaboration between Hamas and Al Jazeera, and that is what we're going to be talking about today. Welcome to the reality show. I'm joined by Marco, Richard, and Alex. Alex, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so really it comes as no surprise to me. If anybody remembers the war back in 2014, I always remember the coverage of that particular conflict. Because on the English version of Al Jazeera, what you would see is, of course, all of their various very emotive, very kind of sad pictures of, injured children, etc., etc. And then when you turn on to the Arabic version, it's entirely different. The tagline there is Gaza resist. And then at the very end of the war, which I remember that war lasted about a month, it was Gaza is victorious. The entire it's actually inconceivable to me that the IDF only managed to uncover six terrorists working for Al Jazeera. I think there are many more. If you go to one of Al Jazeera's head anchorman, his first name is Fuad. I can't remember his surname, but he is quite famous. He's an anchorman. His pinned post on October 7th was the a picture basically of stars and moons and fireworks. And the kind of the tagline underneath was the day that restored our dignity, or did the day that restored our national pride, I think is better translated. Really not surprising to anybody here.
Marco.
Yeah, as Alex said, there are two Al Jazeeras really. One in the English version, which looks very much like a version, a pro-Hamas version of the BBC or the Guardian, which is quite telling. And the other version, much more conservative, much more right-wing, conservative, Islamic, if you like, ideology pushed by the Arabic version, which is banned in lots of states because Qatar is Shiite, isn't it? Is aligned with Iran, isn't it? Saudi Arabia and certain other area, they're not allowed to broadcast, and nobody's whinging about it. Israel kicks them out because they've been aiding their enemies, and it's the end of the world. While they're banned by other Arabic people, so that's fine. It's just what they do. But to be honest, what this issue reveals is um, how bad we are in the West at understanding and engaging with what's happening on the ground. There is a war going on between civilization and Islamic destruction, effectively, and a bunch of savages trying to take over civilization in the Middle East. And we do not understand that they will not stop at any institution that we assume to be, quite revered or important. they will use and destroy and attack and exploit every single weakness that the West has. And despite the fact that we in the West, we still consider the press as something, if you like, sacrosanct, we still, I use the word instinctively, but not in a deterministic way. We look at the press as something that you can rely on in order to get information. In the Middle East, to be a journalist in those countries, you have to be aligned to the dictatorship which is in power. Otherwise, A, you're not going to get the job, and B, you might be killed if you don't say the right thing. So this kind of misunderstanding of what the media is in the Middle East and assuming that the kind of standards we uphold in the West are following in the Middle East is totally bogus. And that will lead you down a road that makes you believe what the pro-Hamas people are telling you.
I like how you said Al Jazeera in English is like the pro-Hamas version of the BBC and the Guardian. No, that's called the BBC and the Guardian. But yeah, the sister network. Richard.
I kind of want to direct my first thoughts to those kind of people who say, I know Al Jazeera's rotten, so I never watch it. So I avoid it totally. You don't have to tell me they're rotten. I know they're on the side of Hamas, etc. Because I think that part of the problem is it doesn't stop there, because it feeds into the BBC, the Guardian, CNN, all the others. And of course, it feeds in also to social media and the internet and the amount of AJ plus stuff with, they're in social media stuff that is also available and all that kind of stuff. So it has a far bigger impact. It's sort of what they say is often rebranded by somebody else or barely concealed by somebody else. Sometimes they reference the fact it comes from there, but frequently not. And they take it as source material, and therefore it is something that we do need to shine a strong light on. And of course, also the fact that the defense of Al Jazeera is always done under a big banner of press freedom generally, as if they're all, people like organizations like Amnesty International are cited, for example, when it comes to, closing the Ramallah office, for example, of Al Jazeera, as was done fairly recently in September. And various other occasions. To their defense always comes those talking about press freedom as if these are completely impartial journalists who are totally respectable and aren't as corrupt as we're talking about here. We're not talking about corrupt in terms of a bit of spin, are we? We're talking about people engaged in the war that they're trying to cover and deliberately, siding with the violence that they are also claiming sympathy for in the next breath. And that is clearly unsustainable, and it needs to be broadcast wide and loud by everybody else, including those who are interested in press freedom. Yeah,
and Best Monster asked in the chat, has Israel banned Al Jazeera permanently? I don't believe so. I think it was a temporary ban, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, that issue of press freedom, of free speech. Look, if you're a part of the military apparatus, then you don't get to tell your victims that to not target you. And anybody who thinks there's any free speech issue here, look, Qatar is a totalitarian regime where people don't have the right to criticize their own government, but are forced to pay for things like Al Jazeera. So no, its existence is a violation of free speech. It is not free speech in any way. Thank you, Christian, for the super chat. Christian says, thanks to Alex for the security forum. Didn't know about it yet, or didn't know it yet. Very interesting website. Will be followed in the future. That's Regavim, I believe, is the one he's no.
It's Habitronistim.
Oh, all right. Habitronistim. If you have a link that we can put in the chat, we will do that. Yeah,
Radzi, I really also just want to interject here because I think that we are discussing the kind of the material terrorism that Al Jazeera kind of is engaged in, and that's one thing. Let's just put a pin in that for now. What about the absolute psychological warfare that they are waging against the Israeli people? For example, kind of dramatizing all of the hostage videos in an attempt to put pressure on the Israeli government and the Israeli people. to accept a kind of cease deal. And not only that, what they also managed to do is they try to thwart attempts by the IDF to actually give instructions to the local kind of Palestinian population. So if they say, hey, you guys all need to move north, all of a sudden Al Jazeera will kind of come in and say, well, you know, do you really need to go north? Or, you know, the repercussion, I mean, you know, it's all in Arabic. So it's a lot of the time it's kind of speaking in almost like, I don't know really what the phrase would be, like kind of parables kind of thing, like, you know, like the fear of leaving the land, and you know, he who pains yearns. It's all, you know, very kind of designed to cause a lot of emotional harm and emotional stress, and also the amount of lies as well that they're engaged in. And these are not just kind of your disgusting BBC lies that go around. These are things like, I mean, there has been this I mean, ridiculous theory going around for, I think, about 20 years, maybe more. I mean, it's even weirder than the poisoning the water wells and making the, you know, whatever, you know, all of the various theories that they have. But this one is that they are saying that murdered terrorists, not murdered terrorists, terrorists that are neutralized by Israel in Israel, and then we send the bodies back to Gaza, right, or wherever to be buried. They say, well, they removed my son's organs and sold them, or you know, they removed the organs, and that's their kind of their organ trade, right? And my son was just a gentle tomato picker, right? And these lies get repeated again and again and again. And whenever there has, you know, whenever a particular conspiracy theory goes out of fashion, then all of a sudden they just kind of pick up, you know, a slightly different iterated version of it. And it's really also getting to the point where it's extremely comical, but in an enormously, you know, kind of tragic way. I encourage anybody to, I mean, if you can stomach it, go to Memri, MERI. That is the kind of the Middle East forum that is focused on translating Arabic to English, like Arabic broadcast to with English subtitles, and just take a look at some of the things that they're broadcasting to their people, and to the Israelis. I mean, it's you'll have a kind of an Islamic cleric on, and he'll just be kind of making justifications for beating your wife, or you know, well, you know, listen, you really do, you know, it's not nice, but you really should kill, you know, if you have any gay children, you should kill them because you don't want your daughters to not be able to get married. I mean, it's very, all this kind of very violent Islamic ideas. So take a look, have a wee look at Memory, because it's a very good think tank to follow.
Yeah, the organs thing, my first reaction to a story like that would be, so, I mean, you know, it's who cares? This is a terrorist. You don't have a right to get his body back in whatever form.
Yeah, but I think also, Razi, it's like, you know, genuine journalists would be saying, okay, I understand, because, you know, European journalists picked this story up and then they had to kind of drop it like a hot potato because they couldn't provide the bodies. Because if the organs have been removed, okay, so and put into the bodies of Israelis, that's what they're trying to argue here, right? Then there will be there will be a body that will not have organs. Let's see the body, right? What a shock! They can't produce the body, right? So it's painful, actually. To call it journalism is a real insult to journalism.
Yeah, and we'll hear more insults to journalism later on in the show, because and we'll talk about the extent to which Hamas actually basically directs the content in Al Jazeera. But yeah, we'll get to that soon. Marco.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone were really interested in journalism, we've seen so many evidence since especially since the summer, since after the rescue of the 4 hostages, including Noah Gamani, where a journalist that was writing for Al Jazeera as well was actually holding 3 of the hostages. Al-Jamal, look it up, even Al Jazeera had to, the defense initially was, oh, he's not one of our employees. No, he wasn't an employee. He wasn't directly on the payroll, but he was writing for you. In 2019, there was an opinion piece that didn't manage to hide, and he's there for everyone to see. He was writing for Al Jazeera, and at the same time, he was writing for the Palestinian Chronicles, a taxpayer-funded charity which is based in the United States. Then you had other people that were involved in Hamas activities. We've seen documents in the past, year and a bit, with journalists directly involved. One of the 6 people that were flagged up yesterday, one of them was actually injured, I think, in February. Was it February? Yeah, February this year. Already known to be part of Hamas activities. So there's so much evidence out there. And the fact that, Qatar itself, come on, what kind of state is that? It's a dictatorship that looks like they got some sort of government because they got election. So we got election, we must be a legit place. And they're holding the Hamas leadership. They are involved in trying to convince Israel to release criminals in exchange for the people who should never even be in the hands of the Palestinians in the first place. They're still held in Gaza. If the West were so up in arms about the way journalists are under attack in Gaza, well, then they should come out of the woodwork, do their job, and show exactly what's happening there. The press, like every other institution in the West, the UN, the ICJ, the ICC, are being weaponized by the Islamists, whose purpose is to use every single institution in the West to wrong foot Israel and try and use them. Given that they can't keep up with the military strength of Israel, they have to find another way to bring down Israel, and certainly trying to destroy any support from the West towards Israel.
These 6 journalists include people who've been, one's a sniper for Hamas, one is a team commander. The evidence provided includes personnel documents from Hamas, telephone books of numbers, training records for training with Hamas, that kind of thing. It's quite an extensive amount of evidence provided so far. And of course, all Al Jazeera have done is deny any of it, as you would expect them to. I think earlier it was spoken about when Al Jazeera was a subject of some concern for a bunch of other Arab countries, and I think that came out during the Qatar diplomatic crisis that started in like June 2017 and ran till January 2021 during the blockade of Qatar, when countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt were all trying to highlight the extent to which Qatar was promoting terrorism and had links to Iran. And Al Jazeera was one of the key bones of contention during that period. And in that period, there was what brought it to an end was the negotiations brokered by Kuwait and the US. And of course, in the course of those negotiations, what forms the compromise? It forms keeping Al Jazeera going in all those in those places. So as usual, compromising on a key value ends up, destroying the value down the line. It destroys the possibility of fair journalism down the line. And of course, that's a big mistake which we're all continuing to pay for today, as Al Jazeera continues to throw out so much propaganda that is being sucked up by the West.
Thank you, Best Monster, for gifting an Ayn Rand Center UK YouTube membership, and congrats, Plonit Armoni, for receiving that gift. You now have access for the next month for 2 hours of additional content, so I hope you'll enjoy it. Yeah, so when we talk about Al Jazeera, first of all, it's important to remember how it became such a big part of our lives everywhere in the West. This was after 9/11, after terrorists showed their ideology in practice, that Al Jazeera started. I guess they were broadcasting before. I'm not sure exactly the timeline there, but I remember their rise to popularity in the West as kind of a way to see the other side, which is weird because CNN and MSNBC already existed. They already showed the other side. I don't think Fox News was great at showing the American side, but it rose to fame in the US. It rose to fame in Europe as well. And it's seemingly untouchable. Like it doesn't matter. These new revelations are not going to do anything to Al Jazeera's popularity. If anything, they're going to increase its popularity. But yeah, this is all very important to know when you're dealing with something that is pretending to be a news organization. So the revelations today are about a secure line that Hamas had to Al Jazeera. Some of the things revealed there was that Hamas would kind of tell Al Jazeera what to say and what not to say. For example, don't report when the Islamic Jihad had failed rocket launches, which they have many of. We remember the Al-Ali hospital bombing that we heard. Israel bombed that hospital and 500 people died. That was an Islamic Jihad rocket. That was not the first. This is a regular thing for Islamic Jihad. And basically Hamas kind of control the way Al Jazeera reported it. There's other stuff that we might get to, but again, none of this impacts Al Jazeera's popularity because the people who want to listen to Al Jazeera are getting what they want from Al Jazeera. Okay, I'll have more to say about that later, but Alex.
Yeah, as well as that, I would also say, I mean, what does Al Jazeera mean? I mean, it means literally Al-Jazeera Qatar. It's like, the peninsula. So it's really giving you a perspective on the news from an Arabian Peninsula or Qatari Peninsula perspective. You're not going to be getting a perspective that is going to be in line with anything really that we stand for. And I think as well, just a kind of just a very quick side note, kind of more furthering on to kind of your points. I think it was Marco that said that there was the Al Jazeera that Al Jazeera was a big bone of contention during the Qatari diplomatic crisis, and I do feel as well that one of the reasons that people started to become so aware of Al Jazeera's negative consequences in their society really was kind of when Barack Obama started kind of fracking. And the Saudis lost their sort of massive sphere of influence and understood that they have to change their society, de-radicalize their society, if they're going to be able to survive in the long run and be an important player in the world. And the de-radicalization process, one of the kind of key components was to really remove Al Jazeera basically entirely, and most other Middle Eastern countries, Sunni Middle Eastern countries followed suit. Yes, so deeply disturbing stuff, really, and also you can really see as well from the internal documents that basically the IDF had shared, the preference that they feel for certain military brigades over other military brigades. That they absolutely, were very much in favor or very much aligned with Hamas's, but they really don't feel that too warm and fuzzy about other brigades, like maybe the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade in Judea and Samaria, and kind of don't trust a Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They're the new kids on the block. They're not media trained. Come to us, we'll give you the truth, and then you can kind of disseminate it. And of course, I don't think we're going to sadly see any long-term consequences for Al Jazeera because they managed to cloak themselves in our values and use our values against us as a weapon. So they just cloak themselves in Western values that we actually do value. Things like freedom of press, which they have no respect for, really, in the Middle East, no respect whatsoever. I mean, just think about what happened to Saudi journalists in the Saudi embassy in Turkey. They were hacked to pieces. Yeah, and so they kind of use this against us as a to shield them from any criticism. Oh, but you can't possibly criticize me. I'm just a member of the media. Yeah, this Kalashnikov that I have on my back is a prop. No, it's actually, what is it? It's the Kalashnikov. That's not a Kalashnikov. That's a tripod. You're seeing things, you dumb Israelis. Yeah, and yeah. So the one of the other documents that also was revealed was apparently instructions that Hamas had given to a particular journalist about his kind of coverage of an Islamic Jihad operation. And the kind of the instructions that were given is that basically you need to just support all of the resistance movements in Gaza, and don't criticize any of them. Don't criticize Islamic Jihad. They're trying really hard. Don't criticize their rockets. They're doing a great job. It's very it's very, what can I say? It's absolutely pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. And why? They're absolute boneheads. If you're going to engage in a conspiracy like this, don't write it down for the IDF to hack into you and translate it and disseminate it, right? Next time, maybe write messages to each other on Post-it notes.
Yeah, you mentioned there's not going to be any consequences. Now, there are not going to be any consequences in terms of their viewership in the West, because again, the people who watch Al Jazeera hear what they want to hear, and they're not going to get that as clearly anywhere else. But one should hope there would be some consequences from Israel, at least extending this temporary ban, if not more.
I just want to say something else, Radley. Sometimes Al Jazeera can really get amazing access and amazing coverage, and that makes people think that this is a really reputable kind of organization that's just, doing a better job than the BBC. Now, no, it's because they're not operating under the normal restrictions that the BBC has. Right? The BBC, as vile as they are, not going to take anybody, they're not going to kidnap anybody and force them to give them information, right? Al Jazeera is. So that's kind of, as well, one of the other things that they do that makes it, because sometimes you're like, wow, this is great coverage. And then you find out how they actually, came across this source, and you understand, oh, okay, fine.
Yeah, and generally, when you hear about their coverage, when you talk about free press freedom, it is important to always remember this is a government. This is basically an arm of a government. So a government, by the way, in a country where there is no press freedom. It's not like Israeli journalists are walking around Qatar trying to find out the information about how the government works there. So the argument is not just ridiculous; it's cynical, and it's almost a test to see if people in the West buy it, and if they do, they pass the test in terms of what Al Jazeera wants from them. Marco.
Yeah, I mean, we know these people are savages, but they're not just cosplay retards banging their head 5 times a day on the floor. They know the West. They know its weaknesses. They're embedded in lots of institutions. It's not a surprise the Qatari invest here in Britain in big companies and big developments. They understand what makes us tick. And because they are effectively embedded with institutions in the West, they know very well how to operate them and how to coerce them, push them towards a certain direction. They know very well that when they provide information to the BBC will just broadcast it because they're on the same wavelength. They understand each other. So when Al Jazeera provides from the ground information, the BBC doesn't check it, that doesn't take it critically, just pushes it down because, as I said, kind of pushes the same editorial line that the Al Jazeera has. And of course, Al Jazeera gets away with things like doing interview on the ground. And when, for example, an injured Gazan blames Hamas for his injuries, they cut off the interview. They get away with it. In the West will be an uproar. When a woman admits on TV that the aid from the trucks that Israel is providing gets taken into the tunnels, she gets cut off. All this kind of activity, all this kind of proof on the ground that the activities that we've been talking about from Hamas are taking place, that all the institutions that are involved in Gaza are actually part of the Hamas machine. They managed to hide it just by saying, "No, not me, Gov, I haven't done it." The latest allegation from the IDF, all they had to do, despite the IDF having the information, the papers, and all the material that they found in the tunnel, they found on laptops that they've been finding for the last year and a bit, all they have to say, like, "Oh, we decry the fabrication of this evidence," and they get away with it. Nobody say, "Hang on a second, how have you got a way of disproving what we've seen?" Now, there's no suddenly investigative journalism going on anymore, because we don't criticize our people, do we? It's ludicrous.
And then you've got the other kind of distortion they engage in. Look at the Sinwar video. You remember the Sinwar video where the drone comes in as he's sitting in the armchair and he throws the stick at the drone, which we've seen a number of times. Well, the Al Jazeera version of that is somewhat different. Not least at the end of it, they zoom right in on Sinwar, so that when he throws the stick, he looks like he's much closer to the drone. And they cut it just before it clearly goes off and misses. So it looks like he's making a much more violent, a last-ditch fight with some strength, rather than the limp, loose throw that he actually engages in. Now, that is intended to create a narrative there that is obviously having some effect, as we talked about, in terms of those peddling the line that Sinwar was a martyr fighting right to the end and all that nonsense. I think, just to pick up on Alex's point about the prop of the Kalashnikov, I think you could spin that the other way as well. You could say the prop is the press flak jacket and the word press written on it as well, because that's equally used for virtue signaling, isn't it? To claim that sanctity that they don't deserve. And one of the things I struggled with when looking into this story and trying to understand Al Jazeera and how it's reporting on Gaza and stuff, is I kept coming across the line that Al Jazeera is the sole international media reporting from the ground in Gaza. And then when I try and understand what that means in a combination of analyzing through search engines and really bullying AI to give me an answer that makes some sense, all I end up with is a lot of contradiction and a lot of fog, to be honest. Because when the BBC is reporting, it talks about using local journalists. Now, local journalists in Gaza, who are they? What is their independence? What is their impartiality? What are their connections to Hamas in terms of access, in terms of spin, etc.? And the user-generated content that organizations like the BBC claim to be able to verify, and those kind of things, as well as, of course, using Al Jazeera material anyway. Not directly necessarily, but reporting the same facts that the journalist at the BBC has seen via them. So I find it really difficult to understand exactly what's going on. But I think the key questions that really need to be asked are things that are about Qatar itself, really, because they're 90% behind it. Is Qatar to be trusted or not? Is its media to be trusted or not? Is its money clean or not? Should it be taken, or all of these elements of the compromising with the enemy, which ends up parasiting off of every last vestige of the good and essentially destroying everyone in the process?
Yeah, and of course, if you ask Israel, yes, Qatar should be trusted and is being trusted, and that's a big part of the problem. I haven't seen any of their coverage on Sinwar, but it doesn't surprise me that they're trying to push this hero narrative. I know we talked about it, you guys talked about it on TRS Extra, but yeah, Sinwar died like a rat, and he was above ground because he was running like the rat that he was. So yeah, that and like, this is not difficult information to obtain. But you really do need to stick to the Al Jazeeras of the world to see Sinwar's death as anything other than him running away, but not fast enough. And yeah, you have to like how you can look at that video of him throwing that stick at a drone and think, wow, what a hero. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, we had a troll in the chat say something in the that I wanted to respond to. No, we don't name trolls, but this one is using the name of a very famous free market thinker, and it's probably not that far off from where that free market thinker would be on this. So he says, one of his comments here is, they are not savages, they are fellow Homo sapiens who have absorbed different ideas. Yeah, that is correct. And somewhere here later, Enric made the point that savages are Homo sapiens. They are completely tribal, mystical. Yeah, these are people who have absorbed different ideas. Those ideas are, we should kill all the Jews. So if you act towards other people with justice, you judge them for better or worse. In this case, you judge them based on the ideas they have absorbed, and they're putting these ideas into action. The action being killing as many Jews as they can. So the right thing to do with the Palestinians is to believe them and then act accordingly. And acting accordingly would mean acting militarily much more seriously than Israel has been so far. Thanks, Best Monster, for the super chat. Best Monster says, even Saudi Arabia banned Al Jazeera. Well, yeah, but yeah, as was mentioned, but it's a different thing with Saudi Arabia. I wouldn't look at Saudi Arabia as an ally to the West in any way. But what does interest me is that Russia Today was banned pretty quickly after Russia attacked Ukraine, and rightfully so. And Russia Today was banned because it's a government channel that's a propaganda channel for its government. In the case of Al Jazeera, again, this is much more. This is not Russia Today. Wasn't sending soldiers and having them pretend to be journalists. Here we're talking about actual terrorists that Al Jazeera knows are terrorists, that they employ them as their journalists, and we watch that and think, freedom of the press. So I'd love to see the day that some countries in the West take a pause from criticizing Israel for defending itself and maybe ban some propaganda networks of the West's enemies. And these are the West's enemies, not just Israel's enemies. Alex.
Yeah, as well. I mean, at some point, I'm sure that the IDF will provide a lot of the evidence is actually just completely and utterly, irrefutable, right? But and I think as well that Al Jazeera is going to really try to pull the wool over the eyes of the kind of the Westerners by saying, "Oh, we just didn't know. I mean, we just hired them and we just know." In there is absolutely no way that somebody can be in Gaza and you don't know who their clan is. You know who their clan is. You know where they live. You know what they're up to. It's inconceivable to me. I mean, of course they knew. They knew, they didn't care, right? And it's very interesting as well that Hamas felt that they needed to establish a secure line to Al Jazeera. So there was also a document that showed that Hamas decided to establish, a Jazeera phone, so that they could speak with all of the various kind of journalists. Yeah. In emergencies. And what kind of emergencies is Hamas going to have? Well, maybe they accidentally the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who were just, they're just learning, so we got to be nice to them. They're just learning the ropes. They fired a rocket right into the Al Shifa hospital, so that's maybe a time when you may need that sort of emergency phone to call up and to, of course, tell them that that of course it was the Israelis and that 500 people died, and it's, I don't know. I mean, as well, what has also come out in these documents, they're also not particularly bright. In any of the things that they're doing are extremely blatant. It's going to be very easy for Israel to prove many of these things. I reckon also you will see some recordings of calls coming out as well from Al Jazeera journalists. You need to also remember that many things will be under like a military gag order right now, especially when there are when Gaza really still is like an active theater for the Israelis. And what I would love to see would be for Al Jazeera and all of their journalists to be denied any. I mean, I really hope that their banning will be a real one, and that they will, really deny entry, of course, to all of them, and basically exile them. It has to, this charade has to end at some point. It really needs to. And maybe Israel should be the first country to do it for the right reasons, right? Because, Saudi Arabia made a great decision in telling Al Jazeera to get out, but they made it for all of the wrong reasons. Okay, you can sometimes do the right thing for the wrong reasons, and that is definitely Saudi Arabia's reasons. Although I do imagine that beyond the fact that the Saudi Arabian regime feels extremely threatened by Al Thani and Al Jazeera, because he's trying to topple him basically. In addition to that, I think that it's really bad to have a radicalized jihadi population, because they get into all kinds of chaos. And you can't actually control them, as I'm sure as many of these countries have already seen. They can't control them. It always ends up kind of breaking off into more violent splinter groups. And yeah, I really hope that we will see the day where Al Jazeera will be the next Russia Today.
Yeah, and you said at the beginning that Al Jazeera is going to respond to this by saying, "Look, we just hired them. We didn't know." That would be a step up from their current position of what are you talking about? Israel has lied in the past. That's the essence of the 3 or 4 minute clip that I saw there. They didn't address it. They just criticized Israel. Okay, there's some interesting stuff in the chat, but I'm not sure we have time. Marco.
Yeah, Alex, you said they're not very bright. Of course, they're not very bright. When even their supporters sport a free market thinker's name, and they don't realize actually all the money they've stolen, all the taxpayer money they've been stealing, they used in order to dig tunnels in the ground, in order to hide their war apparatus, rather than investing into making themselves rich, making their population rich. What kind of behavior is that? It's a behavior of somebody who needs somebody else to produce the goods so they can steal them. These people would not survive if we didn't let them leech off us. That ultimately what we're allowed to do. And the reason why Al Jazeera is like like a cancer, like a barnacle you cannot shake off, is because since 9/11 we've given up on defending our civilization versus these savages, these mystical, God-fearing things that pass themselves as human beings, but choose not to use the brain that they're given, and they choose to sponge off, parasitize, destroy, and kill, just to make more of their proselytes and making more country like them. Eventually, what are you going to end up with? A bunch of parasites, parasiting off of whom, when everybody is like them. So they can't even project themselves forward for a bit and realize that continue this way and you're going to be doomed to living in caves.
There's also additional evidence the IDF have provided in terms of Telegram reports, haven't they, showing a particular, Al Jazeera journalist on October the 7th clearly front and center of October the 7th with full knowledge of what's going on, and of course cheering it in their commentary as well. So I mean, that's all going to play a part of it as well. And of course, you've got to take all of this in the context of what is Israel doing. They're sending a delegation to Doha to discuss the hostages. Well, can you see a contradiction at all in terms of who are you endorsing by using Qatar as a mediating place for deciding the future? I mean, either they're the enemy or they are not. This comes back to my point from earlier. And of course, a lot of the arguments I read were to do with how much Qatar spends on construction. And that's not just in like the UK or Western countries, which they're particularly fond of doing, but even they were given credit ahead of October the 7th for their construction work, bankrolling work within Gaza, for example. And oh, look, they are doing good things for the Gazan people. They're actually building something upwards instead of downwards underground. So we should let them do more there, because at least it's encouraging the Gazans in the right direction. Well, all of that is a combination of naive and just willful ignorance, and it ends up with the same evil either way. And that's why people do need to wake up and really, smell the coffee.
Thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says, Razi, they deny, but I think Israel is correct. Yeah, I mean, I assume Israel is correct here, but that doesn't actually matter at all. Like, if this news didn't come out, and if none of this, I fully support banning Al Jazeera, but I don't think there should be an Al Jazeera law or some sort of specific, something specific against Al Jazeera. What I'd like to see is some sort of principle here, like, hey, we don't allow propaganda networks of totalitarian regimes, even if they're so-called friendly regimes, and I would start questioning whether that is a possibility at all. But no, if you are a dictatorship, your news organizations are not news; they are propaganda to further prop up your dictatorship, which we oppose, and therefore we will not allow you to broadcast said propaganda in our country or from our country. But that, I think, is a bit too much to ask at this point. Couple of things from the trolls in the chat. So the one who was using the name of a free market thinker, interestingly, was said was about to use an Ayn Rand quote, and then use the quote by her praising a different free market thinker, which is interesting. And another one of our regulars here says, somewhere in the deep recesses of your Zionist minds, a single word echoes into the abyss: chosen. First of all, that's beautiful prose, but yeah, chosen by you. I mean, you're here every single day. We see you in the chat. So yeah, thank you, and please continue trolling. It helps with the algorithm. And as always, you can also troll in a super chat. We may not read it, but we will appreciate the money. Parting thoughts, and where can people find you, Alex?
Yeah, so I think as well that many people, including Dr. Mordechai Kedar, as well as Habit Khonistim, the IDSF, have raised serious concerns about Qatar's embedment in the kind of the Israeli military general class, I'm going to call them, even though they're not a class of people. I mean, like the kind of the retired generals that they then end up kind of being, apologists basically for Qatar, because they're involved in all manner of kind of think tanks as that Qatar is running, and basically on their payroll. So I think that Habit Khonistim, the IDSF, have raised a lot of very interesting points about that. For me, I recommend everybody to visit these various nonprofits that I recommend. Regavim is one, IDSF is of course one. In addition to that, I always recommend everybody visit the Alma Center and give them any kind of moral support that you can for advocating for a strong national security posture for Israel.
Marco, Richard, parting thoughts, and where can people find more?
We haven't seen lots of journalism going on for the last year or so. There's lots of evidence out there, and nobody is really doing much research and trying to verify and telling the real story. So, the information is there. If you're a serious journalist, do your job. But of course, propaganda is easier, and being paid to spew out propaganda is much easier. And, from the bottom of my Zionist mind, to the troll, bite me.
I think when you see op-eds from the director of Al Jazeera in The Guardian, only a matter of like a month ago, talking about the assault on press freedom, you understand where the level to which the corruption has sunk. And also how easily this floating term of press freedom, without any context, any relevance to the terror washing and the terror support of organizations like Al Jazeera, then you cannot drop that context. That context is essential to understanding what it is and whether it even deserves the term press in the first place, because that makes you understand how it sits separate from an attitude to a variety of opinion, which can be based on reality. So there is a place for opinion, but not for the outright lies that promote terrorism, death, and the destruction that Al Jazeera does on a daily basis. Where can you find us? You can find us or some of the clips we've made on the Briefly Objective. The link is in the description below for the short form clips. And also do check out the Substack for Ayn Rand Centre UK for a number of articles, some of which are on Israel on there, some of which on other subjects, big variety of stuff. So please do check that out too.
I'm Razi Ginsburg on X, and I will, just considering some of the stuff in the chat, I'll promote this on today's episode. This is Ayn Rand's Marginalia. This is a book that was published after her death, so she definitely didn't intend for these notes to be published, which also means they're kind of, they were written for her and are very interesting in how she talks. I'm not going to read any of it now, but how she talks about authors of books that she was reading and what she wrote in the margins. There are some very, very interesting comments about a free market thinker whose name was used here in the chat. Those alone are worth the cost of this book. So I recommend that. And of course, I recommend becoming a member of the Ayn Rand Centre UK, getting access to hours of additional content every week, and a bunch of other perks, including our WhatsApp groups, where you get to interact with all of us in the other 22 and a half hours a day when we're not here. We will be back in 22 and a half hours with the Daily Objective and then the reality show. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.